We've been studying a few things out of the book of Joshua. I want to read just a short passage from the book of Joshua, chapter 7. It tells us about a man, just one single person, who did a terrible thing, and yet it had a great effect through the entire nation of Israel. And so maybe this is a bad title for a sermon, I don't know. The evil power of one man. We want to talk about that a little bit, and then we want to reverse the thing and think in terms of the power for good, for a person who does good, and the power that really spreads around to other people, many times unbeknown to us. So in Joshua, the 7th chapter, beginning with the 9th verse. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same thing, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, O sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring these people across the Jordan to deliver them into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of Jordan. O Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by the enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe our name from the earth. What then will you do for those who are your own, called by your own great name? That's a sad story. What is the story behind this? Well, the story behind it is called the sin of Achan. When the city of Jericho was destroyed, there was a man by the name of Achan who disobeyed God. And the disobedience of this one man brought defeat to the whole army of Israel. And so we want this evening to talk about just the story of Achan and some of the things that led up to all of the goings on there. And then finally we want to look at the effect of sin on other people, the sins of my life and how it affects other people. But finally we want to look at the other side and see what the good things of the life of one person, how it can affect other people. So what is the story of Achan? The walls of Jericho fell down. You remember in the lesson that we had last week, the walls of Jericho fell down, and the people were just enthralled with the defeat of Jericho. They marched around that city, you remember, a number of times, one time every day for 6 days, and on the 7th day, 7 times. And I don't know what was going on in the minds of the people of Jericho, but don't you know they were alarmed at all of this. And then with the shout and the trumpets and all of that, the walls came tumbling down. Well, that was a great thing. Now, in the King James Version, there's a funny word that's used right here. God was going to say to the people, do not take any of the spoil of Jericho. Because he said, these are accursed. Now, it's an interesting thing. We don't use the word accursed today the way they did back in 1611 when the King James Version was translated. That meant set aside. It came to have a very bad meaning because you're set aside because you're bad. And so a curse came to mean something that was brought on you because you were an evil person. But the idea of the word originally was that it's set aside, and not exactly the same as the word sanctify, but it's the same general idea. And the idea of this was that the spoil of Jericho, God said, is set aside, devoted to me. It belongs to me. Now, this goes right along with a great deal of other things that God said in the Old Testament about the conduct of Israel. The firstborn always belonged to the Lord. The first fruits of everything belong to the Lord. And they even had the feast of the harvest, which was the emphasis on the first fruits, you see. And so this whole thing of you're entering into the land of Canaan now, and the first fruits belong to me. Well, Achan, this man, and by the way, this is the only place that we see him. He's an unknown character so far as we're concerned. But Achan, as the ruins of Jericho were all there before the Israelites, Achan saw some very desirable things. A piece of gold and a Babylonish garment and some things like this. And so Achan took those things. And a statement from Joshua 7, it says, Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant. They have taken some of the accursed things, or the devoted things, is the way it's usually translated. It's interesting to me. Here was one man who did this deed. And then God comes along and says, Israel has sinned. They went to the battle of Ai, and they spied Ai out. Ai was just a small place, and the spies came back and said, hey, this is a slam dunk, you know. Yeah, we don't need the whole army to go up to Ai. It's just a small place and so forth. We can take it with just a few men, a few hundred men. And so they went up there and tried it, and Ai just defeated them. And that was a reading that I just gave to you. Joshua comes back. Joshua knew nothing about what Achan had done. Nobody did. And Joshua comes back and says, God, why did you bring us to this place? Now just look at the terrible thing that happened to us, because Ai was just a little place, and we knew we could take it, and yet we failed. You brought us here. Why didn't you leave us on the other side of Jordan? You brought us here to die, to be to be conquered by the Amorites. And Joshua didn't understand this. And then God says, there's sin in the camp. There's sin in the camp. He didn't put it in those words, but that was certainly the idea. Now, let's take a look at Achan for just a minute. We don't know exactly what Achan was thinking about, but we can surmise, I think, and speculate a little bit on things that he might have been thinking about. Wow, nobody's around, nobody will see me. It's not going to be known, and here's some very valuable stuff that I can use. This gold and Babylonish garment and all this sort of thing. These are good things. Nobody around to see me. What is he, what harm is it going to do? And so he took them. Or he may have been thinking, well, it's kind of silly, this whole thing of the first fruits belong to God. Look at all of the ruins around here, and this is just a little bitty pile of stuff. It doesn't make any difference. There are a whole lot of things like this that go through our minds when we're, bad word, when we're considering sin. When we're considering sin. We have all kinds of excuses. Nobody's going to be harmed by this. Nobody is going to see it. It's going to be a private thing. And we just go through all of these gyrations about what this sin is going to do. And it ain't going to do nothing. It's just not going to do a thing. Nothing really is going to come of this, because it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Now, there's a sidelight here, I think, that's very important about this, and that is that greed got in his way. He even says this a little bit later. They found him out in a very strange way. They cast lots, and the lot fell on this tribe. Cast lots, it fell on this tribe, on this family, and so forth. And it finally came down, and Achan was identified. And in Joshua chapter 7 and verse 21, here's what he said. He confessed his sins. And here's the way he explained it. He said, when I saw the plunder, the beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. When I saw it, I coveted them. and I took them. I saw, I coveted, I took. Notice the progression of this. Sin has a way of progressing like that. It's not something that just comes all of a sudden. I believe that I will kill a person. I believe I will steal something. No, there's progression up there. And the progression usually takes some sequence, sort of like this. I saw it. I coveted it. Do you know what the word covet means? A lot of times we talk about covet as if it was some monstrous thing that none of us would ever covet. We define it right out of existence, kind of, you know. Well, the word covet literally means to be greedy. And I've done it, you've done it. We've all had times when we were greedy about things. I want the whole thing. I don't want just part of it. I want the whole thing. I want it instead of you getting it. And so on and on and on. And so Paul says in the Colossian letter, the 3rd chapter and the 5th verse, he said, beware of some things. Put to death, therefore, your members which are upon the earth. And then he begins listing. Notice the company in which coveting is found. Fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desires, and covetousness, which is what? Idolatry. Covetousness, which is idolatry. Why is it that covetousness is idolatry? Well, it's very easy. Because we see and we covet and we take. Greed plays an important role in this whole thing. And when I have the opportunity to satisfy my greed, that's when the sin comes in. So he says, I saw it. I was greedy about it. And I took it. And that progression, you see, it's almost as if God says to us, I'm going to give you a couple of stumbling blocks toward your sin. First of all, you can stop right here. When you see that, you can say to yourself, no, that doesn't belong to me. That is not mine. I have no right to it. That's the end of it. And then you can deal with your own greed. If you go in the next step, you can deal with your own greed and say, yes, I really want it. I see it. I really want it. I'm having to fight this thing off, but I can win that battle. And then if I lose both of those battles, that's when sin comes in and dominates me. Now, all sins are not like that, but many sins are. Billy Graham said one time, a bad time to just try to decide on morality may be when a young man and a young lady are in the back seat of a car at a drive-in theater. And his whole idea was that you should have decided that a long time ago under different circumstances. I've mentioned this before. There's a bank right across the street, down a block from me and across the street. I go in there and carry my millions and millions of dollars, all the time. I go into that bank. I pass by that bank a whole lot. I never have walked up to that bank and think, shall I rob that bank? I never have thought in that direction. Why? Well, because that was something that was decided by me a long time ago. Now, that's the way my life needs to be directed. That's not always the case. There are other things that, we all wrestle with. And Achan's problem was, he allowed greed to take charge of him, and then he sinned. He took it. So I saw, I coveted, and I took it. Well, he had a heavy price to pay. His death. And the death of others as well. This progression, then, it seems to me, turns out to be very, very important. Again, let me say, what might he have thought of while all of this was going on? Oh, nobody will ever know. God knows. He may have said, well, amid all of the spoils, it won't even be missed. Nobody will know that I took it, and nobody will really miss anything because there's so much all around here. God recognizes what I've done, though. And this is one that we just hear so much today. This is a victimless crime. Nobody is going to be hurt. I can benefit from it. Nobody's going to be hurt by it. I can enjoy what I do, what I take, or how I act, or whatever it might be. And it's a victimless crime. It's a victimless thing. So society ought not to condemn me for doing this because nobody suffered as a result of it. Well, I don't know whether Achan thought in these terms or not, but I'm trying to say that that's what happens to us so much of the time when we are tempted to sin. Now, let's look at the other side of this. Here is one man who committed this sin, and it was such a terrible thing that God said, all Israel has sinned, or the nation of Israel, or the people have sinned. He was not talking about their real actions, but here are the consequences. Here is what has happened as a result of that. You see, God takes sin very, very seriously. Our culture does not take sin very seriously. I've told you about a situation that I was in one time, and at a homeowners meeting, and there were various couples sitting around, and everybody introduced themselves, and well, I'm so-and-so, and this is my wife, so-and-so, and so forth. Came around to one couple, and this man said, well, my name is, and whatever his name was, he called it, and he said, this is my girlfriend. We live together. We're living in sin. And that's just about the way he said it. Because you see, sin doesn't mean very much in our culture today, so much of the time. It's even lauded, and it's promoted. And there are so many things that deal with it and make it look beautiful. And so it's kind of like what Paul said, the devil himself, Satan himself, Paul says, transforms himself into an angel of light. But he also says, beware of the devil because he walks around like a roaring lion. And the contrast here is not so much in his appearance as it is in what are the consequences and how he tempts us. He says, he teaches us that the value of disobedience is greater than the value of obedience. And that sells a lot of people. Well, no one will ever know it. It's a victimless crime. Now, we just sang a song. Just before the service, Joe said, do you have any songs you'd like for us to sing? And I said, no, not really. And then I said, yes, I do too, because I'm going to mention one of the songs in my sermon. We just sang it, Pure in Heart, O God, help me to be. In a part of that song, here's something that says, keep me from secret sin. Keep me from secret sin. Reign thou my soul within. Purer in heart, help me to be. You see, all of this emanates from my heart. If I can learn to keep my heart pure, my life will be so much more effective. And now all of the evil that might come to other people as a result of what I do, all of that evil it won't exist because I'm keeping my own life straight. I knew a man who had been married for quite a number of years. I don't know how long, but he'd been married for quite a number of years, had grown children and all of this. And lo and behold, we found out, and he told me about it. He had been carrying on various affairs with other women for a number of years, unbeknown to anybody. And then when it finally came to light, The number of people who were hurt by that, many, many people, not just the immediate family, but so many other people were hurt by that. Folks, our lives really say something in the consequences that our lives present to other people. In the reverse of that, it's exactly the same way. We may do things that are good, and we think, well, nobody ever notices what I do. Yes, they do. God notices. No man is an island. I wrote down some things here that came to me as I was preparing this lesson, and I thought sometimes we think things are so little, they don't really amount to much. I don't have very many abilities. I don't have very many positive things that I can do. And so people say many, many times, well, there's just nothing that I can do. A man came to me when I was preaching at Glendale, an elderly man, and he said, Jack, my years of usefulness are gone. I'm of no use to anybody. And I don't mind telling you what this fellow's name was, Pat Shattuck. What was his name? And Brother Shattuck was always present. And I said, Brother Shattuck, let me tell you something. Every Sunday when my children come to church with me, every Wednesday, every Sunday night, when we come in, we always see the Shaddocks. I like that. I said, that's a good influence on my children to see two people who have been married for over 50 years, still faithful to the Lord, coming even in hard times, they're faithful. And I said, that is valuable to me beyond expression, because my children see that kind of an example. So you see, a lot of times we don't know what the consequences of our good acts might be. You've heard this, but I'm going to read it. It comes at least as early as the 14th century. I had heard this so many times, and I had no idea of its origin, and so I went back and looked up about its origin. Couldn't find very much, except that it's first referred to in the 14th century, and here it is. And you'll say, oh, I've heard that 1,000 times. Here's 1,001. For want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, a horse was lost. For want of a horse, a rider was lost. And for want of a rider, a message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. And for the want of the battle, the kingdom was lost. All for the want of a horseshoe nail. You see, sometimes we don't think in terms of how valuable our lives are, how valuable it is for us to be godly, good people, and we say, well, nobody's noticing me. Oh, yes, they are. Oh, yes, they are. You might not know it, and I might not know it, and we may die never knowing it, but folks, people are seeing us. They see what kind of people we are, and it has the result of good in their lives. So this whole thing of how is it that my life is, the consequences of my life are seen by so many other people. Well, if I could be this, if I could do this, if I knew how to do this, if I were a teacher, if I were a preacher, if I were this, then, I could have some influence. There's a poem called Maud Muller that has the closing part of the poem is really a lovely thing. It's about an attorney who longed for a simple life, compared with a young lady who longed for a life in the city, and she lived in the country. And they came together, and They silently fell in love with each other at first sight. And then he rode away on his horse, and they never saw each other again. And then John Greenleaf Whittier made this statement. It says, of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. And that has always just touched me from the first time that I heard it, because it just seems that there are so many things in life that are good, that we can participate in, that we can do, that have an enormous influence and an enormous effect that we're not aware of. Back in 1926, which happens to be the year that I was born, back in 1926, there was a man by the name of James A. Francis, and he wrote a eulogy to Jesus Christ. He put it in a book. He was a preacher, and he put it in a book. And in this eulogy, he spoke of the simple things about Jesus. He was a carpenter for 30 years. Then he had just a 3-year ministry. And he goes on and beautifully describes all of this. And we would say, if we didn't know who he was talking about, we would say, this guy's a real loser, you know. He's just a real loser. There's nothing spectacular about him. But he ended up like this. 19 centuries have come and gone. And today, Jesus is a central figure of the human race. All of the armies that have ever marched, and all of the navies that have ever sailed, and all of the parliaments that have ever sat, all of the kings that have ever reigned, all put together, have not affected the lives of mankind on earth as powerfully as this one solitary life. Well, of course, we'll say, yes, but he was the Son of God. Yes, that's true. We are the sons of God also. Not in the same sense, but there's something unique that he's given to us. And we need to think of our lives as being molded to fit into the culture and yet not be part of the culture that we live in. To fit into the culture because we serve the culture, but not be part of the culture because we'll not be caught up in the things that the culture does that are wrong. And so this was kind of the life of Jesus. He was the friend of sinners. He was the friend of the publicans. And yet I think, just as James Francis has said here, you take everything put together, the armies, the navies, the people, the philosophers, the kings who've reigned, and all of this all put together, they have not affected the lives of people like this one solitary life. He wants us to become like him. So, the life of a terrible man, Achan, his deed caused it to be said that Israel sinned and they lost the battle. On the other hand, the contrast of this is the life of Christ and the deeds that he did in service to mankind. See how the influence of lives, whether for good or bad, see how the influence of our lives plays a very important role in the history of mankind. If you're not a Christian tonight, this is a good time to become a Christian. This is a good time to be baptized into Christ, to put him on, to have your sins forgiven, and have the hope of everlasting life. Won't you come while we stand together and sing?